Welcome to Two Beans in a Pod. Today, we're diving deep into the really mind-bending prophecies of Edgar Cayce, often called the Sleeping Prophet. We're focusing particularly on his, well, let's say, controversial forecasts about Earth's pole shift. We'll explore his incredible visions, their links to ancient structures, this idea of a coming new age, and then we'll try to square them up against what science tells us about our planet's geophysical stability. So the big question we're tackling today is this. Does Cayce's pole shift prediction offer a genuinely credible glimpse into Earth's future and maybe a profound spiritual transformation? Or is it perhaps firmly in the realm of pseudoscience, really flying in the face of established geological evidence?
Right.
Now, I'll be making the case for the, let's say, potential significance of Cayce's predictions, looking at them in their broader context.
And I'll be offering a critique grounded more in the scientific evidence and, the historical assessment of these kinds of claims.
Okay, so Edgar Cayce certainly made, numerous prophecies concerning rather cataclysmic events. Among them was the significant shift of the planetary axis. His Earth Changes prophecies hinted at a series of events unfolding between 1958 and 1998. And the pole shift itself was specifically predicted, depending on the reading, sometime between 1998 and 2001, or maybe even around 2025.
Okay.
But he didn't really see these geophysical shifts in isolation. He connected them to a new cycle or a new era, a spiritual transformation into what he called a golden age. This would be a time of collective enlightenment, spiritual awakening, maybe even the development of psychic abilities, a grand transition from the Piscean to the Aquarian age.
Right, the astrological ages.
Exactly. And what's particularly fascinating is Cayce's assertion that, ancient civilizations actually understood these cosmic rhythms. He suggested the Great Pyramid of Giza, for instance, was built specifically to align with changing pole stars, like Thuban, then Polaris where we are now, and eventually Vega in the future. Now, this shift from Polaris to Vega would require a pretty considerable, 51-degree change in the Earth's northern axis pole. Cayce saw this as a gradual process, ushering in this new age where humanity might regain godly powers reminiscent of, the Atlantean and Lemurian eras. And of course, proponents often point to Cayce's prediction of Atlantean rising, specifically that a portion of the temples would be discovered near Bimini in 68 or 69, and the discovery of the Bimini Road in 1968, right in that time frame, is often held up as, compelling evidence of his accuracy.
Well, I have to say, I come at this from a completely different angle. The whole cataclysmic pole shift hypothesis says, advanced by people like Cayce, it's largely considered a pseudoscientific claim in the scientific community. When we look at the actual research, it pretty unequivocally demonstrates that true polar wander, which is the relative motion of the spin axis with respect to the planet's crust, it occurs at an incredibly slow rate. We're talking typically 1 degree or even less per million years.
Per million, right?
Yeah, per million years. And the data we have collected over the last 130 million years shows that the geographical poles really haven't deviated by more than about 5 degrees in that entire time. So this directly contradicts any hypotheses of rapid, dramatic shifts like the ones Cayce seemed to describe happening within, decades or just a few years.
Okay.
Now, it is true that geologically rapid phases of true polar wander might have occurred way back between, say, 790 and 810 million years ago, potentially shifts of around 55 degrees. But these are on vastly different geological timescales than Cayce's predictions for our near future or recent past.
Right.
And, Cayce's Earth Changes prophecies, they're deeply associated with the New Age movement, this sort of broad spiritual trend embracing mysticism and so on. And they've often been described as pseudoscience, precisely because they tend to use scientific-sounding terminology to, rationalize visionary ideas that lack empirical validation. Critics, like James Randi, for example, consistently highlighted that Cayce's language often had these built-in outs, phrases like, "I feel that," or "perhaps," which kind of allowed him to avoid making concrete, verifiable declarations.
And frankly, many of his predictions were demonstrably inaccurate, or at best just unverifiable. You mentioned, or rather the outline mentions, his predictions of the destruction of Los Angeles, San Francisco, New York between 58 and 98. Well, those simply didn't happen, and there are documented cases where he even gave diagnoses for individuals who were already deceased, which, significantly undermines the credibility of his clairvoyant claims. And really, to discuss this properly, we absolutely need to clarify what we even mean by pole shift. From a scientific standpoint, there's a really crucial distinction between a geographic pole shift, which is a true polar wander I mentioned, and geomagnetic reversals.
Okay, explain that difference.
Sure. So, true polar wander, as I said, is incredibly slow. It involves the Earth's actual rotational axis moving relative to the crust, and it happens over millions of years. Geomagnetic reversals, on the other hand, are changes in Earth's magnetic field's polarity. The north magnetic pole becomes the south and vice versa. Now, these reversals do happen maybe over thousands of years, but they do not involve any physical shift of the planet's rotational axis itself.
I see.
And while it's true that the Earth's magnetic field has been decreasing in strength for the past couple of centuries, leading some to speculate a geomagnetic reversal might be starting, this phenomenon is entirely distinct from a geographic pole shift. It doesn't imply an imminent physical reorientation of the Earth that would cause the kind of catastrophes Cayce talked about. The current decrease in field strength just isn't seen as an impending geographic pole shift.
Okay, your data on true polar wander is, certainly compelling for those massive timescales. I understand that. But I'd argue that focusing only on that strict geophysical definition might perhaps miss the broader scope of Cayce's vision. I'm not totally convinced his reading should be confined to a purely physical understanding of pole shift.
How so?
While his vision arguably encompasses a more holistic understanding, maybe alluding to an energetic or, dare I say, spiritual axis shift alongside potential physical manifestations. And this becomes particularly interesting when we consider those Great Pyramid alignments you mentioned. Cayce indicated the pyramid was built to point to different pole stars, Thuban back then, Polaris now, Vega in the future. The sheer scope of these alignments spanning such vast periods suggests perhaps an ancient awareness of Earth's long-term cosmic dance, an awareness that might not be fully captured by just a narrow geophysical definition of true polar wander focused on, recent geological history. It points possibly to an understanding of a dynamic Earth that transcends what modern science currently acknowledges within its typical shorter timescales. Could it be that what we perceive as scientific changes, like, slight shifts in Earth's wobble or the magnetic field, are maybe just the physical echoes of a much grander, perhaps energetic reorientation that ancient civilizations and maybe psychics like Cayce were somehow tuned into?
That's an interesting philosophical framing, I'll grant you. But if Cayce's spiritual transformation is so deeply intertwined with these geophysical shifts, how do we interpret the obvious lack of those dramatic physical changes he seemingly predicted for specific dates and places? Let's turn back to the accuracy issue. You cited the Bimini Road discovery earlier. Now, while the timing of that discovery in 68 does align with a Cayce prediction about Atlantis rising, it's really crucial to note that the Bimini Road structure itself, it's widely considered a natural geological formation by many, many scientists. It's likely beach rock. It's not generally accepted as a man-made structure from Atlantis. So attributing it to Atlantis is pretty speculative, and it doesn't really offer concrete validation of a specific prophecy about ancient temples rising, does it?
I see why you'd be skeptical about its origins. And yes, the man-made nature is debated. I concede that. But even if we set aside the debate about what it is, the timing of its discovery seems undeniably precise relative to Cayce's prediction for Atlantis to begin to rise or be discovered. He said expected in 68 or 69, not so far away. That level of specificity, both in location, near Bimini, and the time frame, it feels like a powerful example of predictive ability that maybe can't be just easily dismissed as purely vague. And furthermore, Consider his prediction from back in 1936. He spoke about the breaking up of many powers in terms of world affairs. Now, this wasn't some vague spiritual thing. It coincided quite precisely with the outbreak of the Spanish Civil War, Chiang Kai-shek's declaration of war on Japan, Hitler's reoccupation of the Rhineland, events many historians see as the direct lead-up to World War II. These were profound global shifts in power, not minor tremors. Doesn't that suggest a rather remarkable foresight into geopolitical and perhaps by extension planetary changes?
That's a fair point about the timing again, but it's still vital, I think, to differentiate correlation from causation, or even just hitting on major world events that were perhaps foreseeable to astute observers even without psychic powers. And we have to weigh these potential hits against the misses. Remember, Cayce made over 14,000 readings. Less than 20, a tiny fraction, actually discussed physical Earth changes in detail.
Okay.
And many of those were either quite vague or, as skeptics like Randy extensively documented, proved to be inaccurate or were maybe quoted out of context later. Randy specifically highlighted Cayce's, quote, notable failures, half-truths, and his reliance on that evasive language we talked about, which allowed for multiple interpretations after the fact. And beyond the general prophecies, there are these specific, verifiable instances of predictive failure. We already mentioned the coastal cities that weren't destroyed, but even more concerning, I think, are cases where he provided detailed medical diagnoses for patients who were already dead, like a woman named Theodoria Alozio. He prescribed complex cures for her the day after she had died.
Right, I've heard of that critique.
And he also confidently declared the Piltdown Man fossil find to be genuine, which of course was later exposed as one of the most famous archaeological hoaxes ever. These kinds of documented inaccuracies, they make it really hard to accept his predictions as consistently reliable foresight, even for those predictions that seem compelling, like the timing ones you mentioned. Why do you think these documented failures are so often overlooked or explained away by his proponents?
Well, I think it's important to consider that Cayce's readings often suggested more of a gradual transition for this new age. The changes might manifest primarily in human consciousness, in collective responsibility, rather than solely through, sudden catastrophic physical events.
Okay.
His material often emphasizes the idea that humanity's consciousness, our collective choices, can actually alter prophesied outcomes. This implies a dynamic future, not necessarily a fixed, unavoidable doom. So it's maybe not always about immediate dramatic destruction, but perhaps an evolving shift in awareness, where physical events are reflections or potential reflections of these inner shifts. He spoke of the Golden Age as a time when humanity would collectively choose a higher path, and the planetary changes would accompany and maybe even be influenced by that shift in consciousness. So perhaps the lack of dramatic physical destructions means humanity is, on some level, choosing a different path, or maybe just hasn't fully entered that intense phase of transformation yet.
That's certainly a compelling argument about consciousness and free will affecting outcomes. It definitely resonates with a deep human desire for meaning and agency in the face of potentially frightening predictions. However, even if we consider gradual changes and this spiritual overlay, the specific physical manifestations described by Cayce, things like particular coastlines being destroyed or significant shifts in geographical land masses happening by certain rough dates, they simply haven't occurred as predicted, even gradually in many cases. And from a scientific standpoint, interpretations regarding spiritual or new age transformations, while they might offer a comforting narrative, are inherently untestable, aren't they? They're based on belief, on personal experience, rather than on empirical evidence. That makes them exceptionally difficult to reconcile with scientific discourse. When scientists talk about Earth changes, we're looking for measurable, observable, geological or geophysical phenomena. The shifting of consciousness, while it might be a profound concept, just doesn't fall within the realm of verifiable scientific prediction regarding planetary dynamics. So how do we bridge that gap between the subjective spiritual experience and objective scientific measurement when we're trying to evaluate a prophecy like this? It's a fundamental challenge.
Brief pause for thought. If you're finding this exploration of prophecy and science thought-provoking, maybe take a moment to hit the like button and consider subscribing to Two Beans in a Pod for more deep dives into these kinds of complex topics.
Okay, so while we've touched on the spiritual interpretations, let's just bring it back for a moment to some concrete scientific observations. You mentioned magnetic field changes earlier, Advocate, and indeed current paleomagnetic studies do reveal some interesting phenomena. But again, nothing supporting Cayce's idea of a rapid geographic pole shift.
Right.
We know the Earth's magnetic field has been decreasing in strength for the past 2 centuries. Yes. And at a rate that seems faster than simple diffusion alone would suggest. This does lead to speculation among some scientists that a geomagnetic reversal might be in its very initial stages. However, and this is the key point, this is a process expected to unfold over thousands of years. And as we've discussed, it's fundamentally distinct from a geographic pole shift, the actual physical reorientation of the planet.
Okay.
Furthermore, the long-term data we have, looking back over the past 800,000 years or so, shows no systematic decrease in the dipole moment that's essentially the strength and alignment of Earth's main magnetic field. That would suggest an imminent reversal is upon us. The Earth's core dynamics are incredibly complex, and predicting long-term changes is extremely difficult. So while magnetic field changes are happening, there's simply no current scientific basis for expecting a rapid, destructive geographic pole shift in the near future, as Cayce seemed to imply.
I'm not entirely convinced that line of reasoning closes the door, though, because while science may not predict a cataclysmic geographic pole shift right now, these observed scientific phenomena, like the ongoing magnetic field changes you describe, could perhaps still be interpreted as subtle precursors, maybe correlates, to the larger Earth changes envisioned by Cayce, indicate a highly dynamic Earth system, one that is undergoing significant, albeit perhaps slow from our perspective, transformations. Cayce himself once stated something like, "The Earth is only an atom in the universe of worlds." This suggests, to me at least, a broader cosmic perspective on Earth's transformations. Perhaps these magnetic shifts and other subtle changes we can measure are part of a larger, interconnected, energetic evolution rather than just isolated geophysical events. Such a perspective challenges us maybe to look beyond purely physical, immediate interpretations and consider how our planet might be transforming on multiple levels, physical, energetic, maybe even spiritual, in ways that our current science is only just beginning to grasp. So, to sort of recap, today I've presented Edgar Cayce's detailed predictions of pole shifts and these associated Earth changes as potentially profound insights into our planet's future, deeply interwoven with a vision of human spiritual evolution. We've looked at specific examples like the uncanny timing of the Bimini road discovery and the geopolitical shifts Cayce foresaw, and discussed the possibility of ancient wisdom embedded in structures like the Great Pyramid, suggesting a knowledge of vast cosmic cycles perhaps beyond our current scientific timescales.
And I have rigorously critiqued those claims, emphasizing the strong scientific consensus on Earth's general geophysical stability, at least on human timescales. We've highlighted the incredibly slow nature of true polar wander and underscored the well-documented inaccuracies and the arguably pseudoscientific nature of many of Cayce's more dramatic predictions. That distinction between true polar wander and geomagnetic reversals remains critical, and current scientific evidence simply does not support a rapid, cataclysmic geographic pole shift in the timescales Cayce suggested.
Right, and while substantial disagreement clearly remains regarding the, let's say, literal interpretation and the scientific validity of Cayce's pole shift prophecies, both perspectives I think do acknowledge a dynamic Earth. Whether we see it through incredibly slow geological processes or through these prophesied transformational events that maybe invite a more holistic view.
Indeed. I think the discussion really highlights that inherent tension, doesn't it, between spiritual foresight or claims of it and the demands of empirical evidence when we try to understand our planet's future. It reminds us that different frameworks can offer distinct yet perhaps equally compelling narratives in their own ways.
Absolutely. Ultimately, this material really invites us to consider how these different frameworks, the prophetic and the scientific, offer such distinct narratives about Earth's journey and, well, humanity's place within it. There is clearly much more to explore within this absolutely fascinating subject.
Thank you for listening to The Debate. If you found this exploration of prophecy and science thought-provoking, please do consider hitting the like button and subscribing for more deep dives into complex topics like this one.
And if you are interested in the book, please order it from the link below.